Excuse me, everyone. We're going to get started. Thanks for coming today. My name's Tyler, if any of you have not met me yet. And if you have not, this is your first time with the Archives, welcome. Oh, you're good. And today we have Ian Wilson with us, and he will be presenting on his book, Catastrophe at Custer Creek, which is about Montana's deadliest train wreck. And Ian is nice enough to offer a discount on these. Retail price is $26, and he said he would sell them to you guys for $20. So if you'd like to make a purchase,
and autograph too.
Catastrophe at Custer Creek documents the final ride of the Olympian just after midnight on June 19th, 1938. Olympian number 15, an elite passenger train operated by the famed Milwaukee Road, crashed into Custer Creek, which flows into the Yellowstone River southwest of Terry, Montana. In the moments before the train wreck reached a small bridge spanning the typically dry creek, the waters had swelled dramatically, the result of a violent storm system that moved across Montana that day. The wreck killed 49 passengers and crew members and injured another 75, making it the most devastating train accident in Montana history. And Ian will tell the story of that ill-fated Olympian and its ties to Butte, Montana. Ian, thank you again for coming.
I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon now. So thank you all for coming. I really appreciate being invited by Tyler and Butte Silver Archives. And I also want to thank the Montana Historical Society that worked with me to publish the book. It came out just at the beginning of this year, and Far Country Press, who is the publisher here in Helena, and so it's Montana loves its history, and I know Butte does as well. It's great to be in Butte. I live in Bozeman, and so I came on and passed this morning. What I'm going to do today is I have a few slides that I'm going to show first, just to kind of get you into give you a little context for all of this, and then I have a story that I'm going to read today, and one of many stories that are found in the book, and so I'm going to start with this. And this, can you hear me okay? Am I talking too loud?
No, you're good.
Okay, this is good. So if I can figure this out here. So this is obviously the aftermath of the accident here. The Milwaukee Road did go through Butte, as you probably all know, one of the many railroads it did. But it was a very extensive road system, one of the largest and most profitable railroad systems in the country at the time. And you can see, I can point to it, that a lot of their activity was, they were based out of Milwaukee originally, that's how they got their name, but they were eventually based out of Chicago, and very heavy in the Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota area. But then in the early 1900s, in order to be competitive, they decided to build a line all the way to Tacoma, Washington. They had gone as far as the Missouri River, and then they decided to extend it beyond that, and which became known as the Puget Sound Extension. And of course, that line goes right here, all the way through Montana. And so a very extensive railway. Down below here, this is kind of interesting too. This is the elevation of the line. And of course, Butte is one of these tall ones right here. So very challenging at that time to build a railroad through Montana, and specifically through Butte. This is focusing specifically on Montana, and they started here. They came in through here, and hit Terry, and this is where the accident occurred, right in the most eastern part, eastern leg of Montana here, and very remote back in the 1930s and very remote today. If you've ever been, I'm not sure how familiar you all are with that part of the state, but it's very different than here, but really beautiful, different part of Montana. So again, the context that this happened in high desert prairie in eastern Montana. Let's see here. So I'm going to play this. Tyler, will it just, can I click on it?
Yeah, if you hit down, it should do it.
Hit down, like this?
Yeah. There you go.
Affiliated statement present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The States was given by President Roosevelt in a speech of clarity and power. In spite of the determination of this nation for peace, it has become clear that acts and policies of nations in other parts of the world have far-reaching effects not only upon their immediate neighbors,
obviously post-Depression, but just pre-World War II. FDR was president. 1938 World Series, Yankees versus Chicago Cubs. This is a clip from the Jimmy Stewart movie back in 1938.
Yeah, I know. I was going to marry a weakness once. Fortunately, my father knocked it out of me. I'm no millionaire, but I'm not the type to care. 'Cause I've got a pocket full of dreams. It's my universe.
These were some of the more popular songs back in 1938. Obviously had to do with trains as well. I'm sure back in the day, Butte was very familiar with these sounds as well. This was the steam era, primarily. Diesels were just coming into the inventory of a lot of railroads. This is the sound here is actually the S2 Northern that was involved in the crash. I just imagine hearing that echoing through Butte at the time, right through the past year. So, before I tell my story, this is the S2, the actual one, number 220, that was involved in the accident. And it was brand spanking new. Unfortunately, barely 6 months old, out of the shops on one of its first runs. And as you can see from this, from here, this has this is the engineer right here. This little guy. This thing was huge, well over 100 feet in length, 4 driving wheels on it. The cylinders the size of tree trunks. I mean, this was a massive 400-ton plus ton locomotive, and it actually wasn't supposed to be. It was a surprise. It wasn't supposed to be pulling the Olympian that day, but it was a backup for it, and it eventually was involved in the accident. But amazingly, afterwards, it was completely destroyed in the accident. The mechanics and engineers and the specialists in Miles City rebuilt the entire locomotive and put it back on the track within a year. And it continued to do its thing for another, until the 1950s.
How did they get it back on the tracks? They just took it all apart.
They took it all apart, yeah. So, I'm going to read a story, one of the stories here, and it's about a person, one of the people on the train, and as Tyler mentioned, this is 1938, and to give you a little, so I won't repeat what he talked about there, but there were many victims of the accident, but also many people who made daring escapes from certain death, including Florence McGuire here, but also many people who risked their lives to save other passengers. And this is one story from the book. And before I get into it, I was very happy to meet Donna Nels here this morning, and Donna is connected to the McGuire family in Florence, so you have a family person connected here, so it extends all around. So thank you, Donna, for coming today too.
Thank you.
So it was after midnight, early Sunday morning, June 19th, 1938, an elite passenger train called the Olympian had just thundered by empty, sleepy station in Terry, Montana. Owned and operated by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, but also commonly known as the Milwaukee Road, the Olympian had about 190 passengers and crew on board that day. The train was a day into a 3-day, 2,188-mile journey from Chicago to Tacoma, Washington. The route the Olympian followed was known as the Puget Sound Extension, a railroad line built by the Milwaukee Road in the early 1900s. It would be the last of the great American railroad companies to build a transcontinental line from Chicago to the Pacific coast. As the train entered the Yellowstone River Valley, the night sky began to clear. Stars could be seen. The air in the valley was thick with the scent of prairie sagebrush. A heat wave had swept across Montana, triggering thunderstorms and intense bursts of rain across the state. The Sheep Mountains near the Terry Badlands, a formidable pile of colorful ancient sandstone, had slowed the march of the storms, the result being a deluge of rain which pounded the ranches and small communities between Miles City and Terry. Anticipating the Olympians' arrival in Miles City, and despite the late hour, Florence Hand McGuire was full of anticipation. Her younger sister, Irene, was to be married. Not only was she excited to attend the wedding, but she also looked forward to seeing her parents, George and Rose, who lived in Miles City. George was a nighttime policeman for the Milwaukee Road, and unknown to her, her younger twin brothers, Clarence and Bill, were also at the station to meet her. Florence was reminded by her car's porter that the Olympian would soon be arriving in Miles City. She needed to doll up a bit before her arrival, according to her mother. Knowing that the ladies' lounge situated in the sleeper cars were superior to the ones in coach, Florence left her seat in her coach car and walked back 2 cars to the ladies' lounge in the sleeper car Shodo, named after Shodo, Montana, so she could clean up and get ready to greet her family. While applying her makeup, without warning, Florence was suddenly thrown violently against the front wall of the lounge. She lay on the floor, stunned but conscious, thanks to a large couch that had cushioned her impact. Racked by a wave of nausea, Florence rolled over to vomit. Broken glass littering the linoleum floor beneath her made her a crunching sound as she moved. The overhead lights blinked several times but stayed on. As she struggled to sit up, she noticed blood all over her hands where small chunks of glass had embedded. For what seemed like the longest time, she stared at them, trying to comprehend what had just happened and how seriously she might be hurt. Florence could see, but her hearing and situational awareness were muted. The car continued to rock and sway, which struck her as odd. It felt to Florence as though the train was still moving, but she knew it had stopped. A series of sharp screams followed by wailing startled her, making her jump to her feet. All her senses roaring back, she realized that water was causing the car to sway. Staggering to the lounge door, Florence turned the handle, but the door would not open. She could hear people screaming and yelling on the other side. She pounded on the door with both hands and yelled for help as loud as she could. No response. Unknown to her, the impact of the crash had twisted the steel frame of the Shoto, jamming the door shut and trapping her inside. As she pounded on the door, Florence realized she was standing ankle-deep in cold, muddy water that was rushing in from under the lounge door. More water was starting to pour into the lounge from a large crack just under the window. So about 24 hours earlier, the massive oak doors with stained glass windows at the Milwaukee Union Depot in downtown Milwaukee swung open just after midnight. In walked 24-year-old Florence McGuire with her husband, Bernard. He had insisted on driving his new wife to the station at this late hour and helping her to check the luggage. While Bernard's job prevented him from traveling with Florence that night to Irene's wedding, it did have a perk enjoyed by Milwaukee Road employees and their families of a free round-trip pass for Florence. Florence did not mind riding coach since the trip would only take 24 hours. Besides, it had been a long day, and before heading to the station that night, she had worked a full shift at Milwaukee's Misericordia Hospital, a care facility for unwed mothers founded by Canadian nuns. As she found her seat on the Olympian that night, Florence would not have trouble finding sleep. Both Florence and Bernard had deep family ties to the railroad industry, and to the Milwaukee Road in particular. Florence could trace her roots to McLaughlin and Mobridge, South Dakota, both railroad towns founded by the Milwaukee Road. Long before her father, George, took a job as a policeman with the Milwaukee Road, Florence's grandfather on her mother's side, Charles Huffman, helped to build the company's first bridge across the Missouri in 1907, setting the stage for finishing the transcontinental line known as the Puget Sound Extension. And I'll skip this one about Bernard grew up in Butte, Montana, since I now found out from Donna that that's not correct. But he eventually ended up as an apprentice electrician for the Milwaukee Road, a job that would take him to Miles City, where he met Florence. Florence had been on the path to become a nurse since she was 10 years old. Her mother, Rose, who had been forced to quit school after the 3rd grade to help support her struggling family in Wisconsin by working in a glove factory. Rose, whose first language was German, was determined that all her children would get a full education and secure respectable employment. Florence's younger sister, Irene, remembered sitting by their coal-burning stove in McLaughlin, South Dakota, when her mother suddenly declared, "You're all going to college," in broken English. Rose wanted Florence to be a nurse, naming her after Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing, and she also chose Florence's middle name, Gillis, the patron saint of the disabled and needy, purposefully. Irene, meanwhile, was to be a school teacher. As a side note, I mentioned to Donna here, I had the pleasure of meeting Irene and interviewing her several times. She was 101 in Helena, and she was a great source of colorful stories in this book. So after 3 years of training at Miles City Holy Rosary Clinic, Florence passed her exams to become a registered nurse in 1934 and was soon a supervisor at the county hospital. So this picture of her here is circa about 1936 in Miles City. Friends in Miles City introduced her to the handsome Bernard McGuire, a tall man with a quick wit and a big smile to match. They fell in love and married in February 1938, And it was not uncommon for women in the 1930s to lose their jobs if their employers discovered they were married or pregnant. So Bernard and Florence kept their marriage secret for as long as possible. That same year, Bernard was offered a better paying position for the railroad in Milwaukee, working for the refrigeration section of the railroad's West Valley shop yards. Soon the newlyweds packed up and moved to Wisconsin, and in Milwaukee, with both Bernard and Florence in stable jobs with respectable employers, Florence Hand proudly became Florence McGuire. So hours before the crash, the crew of the Olympian had received telegraphed warnings regarding the heavy rains in the Yellowstone River Valley and possible water on the tracks just south of Terry, Montana. Section crews were dispatched to patrol the tracks and look for dangerous conditions. They found none. There was only one substantial bridge along the east side of the Yellowstone River, which provided safe passage over Custer Creek. More of a wash than a creek, it was commonly dry as a ditch for most of the year. The unprecedented rainfall, however, had turned Custer Creek into a raging river. Unknown to crew members, the pounding water had destabilized the main piers that held up the bridge. Moments after the enormous 450-ton steam locomotive and tender began to cross the bridge, it collapsed, resulting in a violent wreck and pileup of train cars. And I have some slides that I can show you. So this is from Florence's recollections. There I was, trapped like a rat in a hole, being put deeper and deeper into the water. Florence, pushing back against the panic surging through her body, a steely determination took over. I am not going to die here in this train car, she told herself. And she looked back at the windows, knowing that they were only the way out. Luckily for Florence, instead of the sealed windows used in the air-conditioned cars, the ladies' and men's lounges had two single-sash windows that could be opened by sliding up. Gritting her teeth and screaming, Florence forced one open just wide enough to see outside. The roar of the rushing river immediately filled the small cavity of the ladies' lounge, drowning out all other sounds and soaking Florence in the process. Her new rayon dress now stuck to her body like shrink wrap. Now standing on the wash bowl, she hung to the towel rack to prevent herself from being engulfed. Mustering all the courage she could find, she pushed her head and shoulders out of the window. Waves of water slapped the side of the Shodo, rocking it crazily. Florence had learned to swim as a child, but fearing that attempting to brave the current would mean certain death. Over the roar of the river, there were other witnesses who said it sounded like being at Niagara Falls. It was so loud. She heard muffled shouting from the roof of the Shodo. Twisting her body around the small window opening, she started to climb up toward the voices. Now fully outside, and remember, it's pitch dark outside, it was 12:30 at night, and standing on the window's edge, she pressed her body against the side of the car as hard as she could, then reached up and grabbed the lip line that ran the length of the roof of the car. Stretched now across the exterior of the car, she took a moment to catch her breath, and she would later describe the water licking at her legs as sweeping, boiling, sucking down the submerged cars. As she decided on her next move, the Shodo pitched slightly further toward the opposite side, allowing her to crawl onto the roof. So it was being pitched back and forth by the water, which is amazing that she was able to do that. So with the car rocking underneath, Florence sat in stunned silence. As she later described, quote, everything was dark. The night was hideous, with flashes of lightning illuminating in streaks, the deep purple and black of the night. There was a feeling of wildness about it. The lightning flashes gave her momentary glimpses of the wrecked train to the west and the immense amount of water that surrounded her. She could see other passengers trying to extricate themselves from the swamped cars and still moving, struggling in the rapids, holding on to pieces of the wreckage to stay alive. I could not see for any distance, she said, but could discern that there were other people, some standing on ledges and places of safety. It appeared to her that the car she was sitting on was in a lake of boiling water. She also realized that she was utterly alone on the roof. Worse, she was cut off from the rest of the train cars, piled like toys on the west side of the river. Her only option was to turn around and follow the rounded car rooftops that led back to land on the east side, which would be on the Terry side of the bridge. She could see people waving to her and shouting, but the deafening roar of the water made it impossible to hear. Defying gusts of wind and now starting to feel cold from her wet clothes, Florence began to crawl. And when she was about halfway across the roof of the Shodo, the back of the car where she was crawling started to sink into the muddy water further, pulling the head of the next car attached, another tourist sleeper, down into the water as well. The heavy steel couplings that bound the two cars together screeched loudly. Frightened by the sound and the teetering car, Florence started crawling faster. Quote, "Through the roaring of the wind, I could hear people trapped below me in the car, tapping on the ceiling of the car, which was practically submerged now in the raging torrent of water. She could also hear people tapping on the windows. No doors could be opened, however. And she later observed that the flowing, surging waters were making a moaning sound, rushing swiftly, curling itself about the piled-up cars. Tragically, she realized, I couldn't do anything to help them. I knew they were being slowly submerged in the water like I was a few moments before. By the time she reached back to the back end of the Shodo, she could see the rear of the car had sunk in the water about halfway up the vestibule door. The lights on both cars were still on, which provided some visibility as she climbed down the ladder. So the Shodo was in the middle of the bridge, and what was happening was that as the bridge was slowly collapsing into the water, Florence was on the Shodo here, and the other car, another tourist sleeper, was on back, so it was pushing, both of them were going down like this. So the vestibule was partially torn off at this point, and the platform that connected the car was now underwater. As she clung to the ladder, the pitching and yawing of the car intensified as the fast-moving water battered its side, spraying mud and silt like a fire hose. With a loud metal-on-metal shudder, the car dropped several feet deeper in the torrent. The dark, swirling water was now up to Florence's knees, and she could feel its powerful pull. Terrified, feeling alone and helpless, she froze. She wrapped her arms around the ladder and closed her eyes. That's the story. So, obviously she survived the accident, right?
Yeah.
So, but let me show you some of the slides here I have here for you. Put on the right glasses. So, it's a pretty amazing story, and Donna was telling me here that she used to talk about and tell that story about being trapped on the top of the Shodo. But I'm going to go back to the first slide, which actually shows. Well, no, I'll continue. Here we go. So this is some newspaper articles that showed the Seattle Daily Times and Minneapolis Journal. Seattle is the location of the destination of the Olympians, so they had a lot of coverage on it. This is just a clip of a little newspaper article that had Mrs. Bernard McGuire there, Florence, a picture of her, and there was multiple stories about her escape that night, and ultimately her rescue. And she was actually rescued by a porter who was in the sleeper car behind her, who risked his own life going in again and again to his car. He rescued all of his passengers and got every single one of them out. And the last person to be rescued was Florence. He grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the car. So she survived that night. Great story. Sorry. So this is the accident, and as you can see,
You're under the speaker there.
oh, I'm under. Sorry, just get away from that. This is the accident. So this is the train was heading in this direction, and this is the Terry side of the bridge right here, and this is the Miles City side. And you can see what Florence was seeing was in the night, you know, with the lightning, she was seeing this pile up here. This is the tender right here. The locomotive is buried and destroyed underneath there. And as you can see, this is Custer Creek, which, you know, as I mentioned, is just a dry ditch for most of the part. So it was really pretty amazing. So the Shodo, where she is, the roof that she crawled off is right here. And it was later determined that the Shoda was called the Car of Death, because everybody inside of it pretty much died except for Florence and a couple of others. And this was the sleeper car behind it that the porter saved everybody from. It separated, rolled once, and ended up on a sandbank just south of the site. So that's the crash scene. And let me see here. So this picture was taken, I actually have, I'm not sure about that, but this picture was taken and appeared in Life magazine next month. But this shows, oops, not bad, my bad. This shows, this is the bridge pier closest to Terry, which was destroyed and turned. This is another one that was wrecked. This is the sleeper car in front of the Shodo called the Ipswich, which turned sideways and slammed into the other three cars. And there were a lot of amazing rescues from this one. There were probably 50 to 60 passengers that got stuck on the roof of this car, who were rescued by a local rancher named Hawkins, and who happened to bring a ladder in the back of his car. You can see the ladder right there. He had a ladder in the back of his pickup truck, and that ladder ended up being the route, because there's other cars on the other side, for probably 50 to 60 passengers to climb up over the tender here and escape to land. And the tender blocked their way. This was filled with coal, of course, at the time, and blocked their escape route for a while until he showed up with the ladder. This is another scene from the dining car just after, this is at dawn, because the accident happened at about 12:30 at night. Rescuers didn't make it to the scene until about 4 or 4:30 in the morning, so a lot of people who were seriously hurt, who could have been saved, ended up dying, just because many of you are involved in emergency service. They call it the golden hour. You know, it was 3 hours pretty much before rescuers got there. So this shows just the incredible, look at that, look at Custer Creek here. It's just a raging river. And these people, this is the dining car, and these people, from the dining car back, the cars were fine and stayed on the track, so they're just watching kind of what's going on here. This is another further back shot later, probably a day into the recovery and the rescue. You can see the Ipswich here like broken in half. There's the tender again, and Milwaukee Road dispatched a couple of heavy derricks, one on either side of the tracks, to help push the cars out of the way and help in the recovery effort. This is another close shot. This roof is the Shodo. This is what Florence crawled across. And as you can see, the car finally just after she got off, probably within 5 minutes, dropped into the water. Everybody else inside was trapped, and it fell on the west side of the bridge above it here, so that prevented it from being rolling and being pushed down the creek like this car was here. And if that would have happened, there probably would have been a lot more survivors, but it got stuck behind this bridge abutment here, this pier, and it was just pummeled for, you know, and pretty much everybody who was inside it died. Again, just another picture. This is the Ipswich taken from the other side. Just the violence of the crash was very significant. This is the U.S. mail car, which was broken in half over the locomotive. That's the number 220. That's the front end of it right there. And this was literally broken in half on this is on the Miles City side of the Custer Creek. A closer up view here. Became quite the tourist attraction. Hundreds of people showed up to, you know, check it out and take pictures. But you can see the destruction here. See, it says the mail car there. But you can also see this. This is interesting too. This is the front of the locomotive. It's tipped on its side. This is a steel rail from the bridge that pierced its smoke box, the front end of the locomotive. So when it went across the bridge, it just like dove in and the rails came right through it. So obviously the engineer and the firemen who were inside, and that's another extensive story inside, were killed in the accident. This is the Shodo afterwards. They're trying, as you can see, it's on the west side of the bridge abutment that I mentioned, and it was a brutal recovery effort. They had to end up, it took days for them to recover all the bodies in there just because it filled with mud and silt, you know, over 24, 36 hours afterwards. This is also another photo of the Shodo itself. Right here, they had to break all the windows to get the bodies out. I put this picture in because this gentleman here is George Hand, who I mentioned. This is Florence McGuire's dad, who was a policeman and spent the better part of a week on the rescue and recovery effort. But he's here, you know, smoking a cigarette, monitoring what's going on with the crews here. So, I'm not sure what happened with this picture. This just shows one of the derricks removing the wreckage, and that's it. So. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'll put it back on one of the slides here. Just for
So how